culture and developmental process.
Hello everyone, today I am going to discuss the topic culture and temperament as well as culture and attachment. Before that, let us define first what is culture, what is temperament, and what is attachment. First, what is culture? Culture is the characteristic and knowledge of a particular group of people encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, and music and arts. The Center for Advanced Research and Language Acquisition take it a step further, defining culture as shared patterns of behaviors and interactions, cognitive constructs, and understanding that are learned through socialization. Thus, culture can be defined as the development of a group's identity as a result of social patterns that are unique to the group. Culture includes religion, food, what we wear, how we wear our language, what we believe is right or wrong, how we sit at the table, how we greet visitors, how we treat loved ones, and other million things. That is culture. Next, what is temperament? Okay, let us define temperament. Temperament is an individual's characteristics level of emotional excitability or intensity and is typically recognized within a few weeks after birth. It is often assumed to be an early indication of personality, though personality combines with temperament with experiences to shape lifelong traits. If you have children or have spent time around children, you may probably familiar with temperament. Temperament can be seen in infants as early as birth. Any parent will tell you whether their child was an easygoing or difficult baby. Perhaps the baby was frequently fuzzy and inconsolable. Some parents may even tell you that their child was so difficult as an infant that they have decided not to have any more children. Other parents will gladly report that their child was an easy baby who handled new situations with ease. In both cases, the parents are considering their child's temperament. So that is exactly the definition of temperament. And next, how about attachment? Okay, let us define attachment. Attachment is the emotional bond between a human infant or a young non-human animal and its parent figure or caregiver. It is developed as a step in establishing a feeling of security and demonstrated by calmness while in the parent's or caregiver's presence. Attachment also denotes the tendency to form such bonds with certain other individuals in infancy as well as the tendency in adulthood to seek emotionally supportive social relationships. Attachment is an extra suspension that is maybe attached to something to perform for a particular reason. Attachment. Now going back to the topic, how culture influences temperament. So culturally influenced social attitudes contribute to differences in temperamental characteristics displayed by children across societies. Furthermore, culture influences the functional meanings or significance of temperamental characteristics in human development. As early as the 5th century before Christ, the Greek historian Thucydides contrasted with the self-control and stoicism of Spartans with the more indulgent and free-thinking citizens of Athens. Today, unique behaviors and characteristics seem ingrained in certain cultures. Italians widely gesticulate when they talk. Dutch children are notably easygoing and less fuzzy. Russians rarely smile in public. Developmental psychologists were fascinated by these differences, how they take shape and how they get passed along one generation to the next. Our work explores the way a society values influences choices that the parents make, and how this in turn influences who their kids become. Although genetics certainly matter, the way you behave isn't hardwired. In the past 2 decades, researchers have shown how culture can shape your personality. In 2005, psychologist Robert McRae and his colleagues were able to document pronounced differences in the personalities of people living in other parts of the world. For example, adults from European cultures tended to be more outgoing and open to new experiences than those from Asian cultures. Within Europe, they found that people from Northern Europe were more conscientious than their peers in Southern Europe. Cultural values are reflected in social attitudes toward children's characteristics. Culturally guided social evaluations and responses in interactions affect the display of temperamental characteristics. So, culture shapes the functional significance of temperamental characteristics. Relative to personality and many behavioral attributes, temperament is believed to be determined to a greater extent by genetic and other biological factors. Nevertheless, personal and social experiences are involved in temperamental development. In a discussion of issues related to culture, temperament, and adjustment, mainly from a contextual developmental perspective, which emphasizes the role of social evaluation process in bridging culture and temperamental development. The review of the research finds that it indicates cultural beliefs and values, particularly to those related to socialization goals, are reflected in parents' and peers' attributes towards children's and temperamental characteristics, such as reactivity in challenging situations and self-control, and its behavioral manifestations. So that is how culture influences the temperament. Yes. And to the next topic, how the culture influences the attachment. So we are now at culture and attachment. So culture influences the value that mothers, families, and communities place on children, as well as the value that mothers, families, and communities place in the role of being caregivers. In many cultural communities, children are highly valued, as is the role of caregivers. As a result, there are many similarities in attachment practices across cultures. Although the attachment relationship in universal parents' attachments beliefs, values, and practices differ around the world. There is an increasing number and increasing diversity of immigrants and refugees coming to Canada from countries where attachment practices may differ from those which are dominant in Canadian health and social services milieux. When serving immigrant and refugee families, it is important to consider whether the variation in their attachment relationships is biased on differing beliefs and values related to parenting, as well as different goals for each stage of child's development. So, culture is such a broadly used term that is difficult to define clearly. For the purpose of this project, culture is framework of beliefs and values shared by group that influences the perception and interpretation of experiences by individuals within the group, as well as their goals for action and their action themselves. These frameworks are constantly changing and being revised. The fact that people are often unaware of the beliefs and values that guide them makes a culture very powerful influence on behavior. Cultural frameworks can influence individuals' perception and interpretation of experiences in different ways. So, not all members or one particular group will necessarily behave in exactly the same way under the same circumstances. Understanding the cultural frameworks that guide people's behavior gives us the opportunity to understand behavior rather than to judge it is based on our own cultural framework. It is also important to recognize that there are challenges to the dominant cultural practices from within each cultural group. As a result of these challenges and changing circumstances, culture evolves over time. Why look why look at attachment practices across culture? So parents' attachments, beliefs, values, and practices differ around the world, as I said. It is also important to remember that there are always variation in people's understanding and interpretation of beliefs and values espoused by their cultural group, as well as extent to which they follow those beliefs and values. Parents need to be asked about their beliefs, values, and personal experiences in order to get an understanding of their behavior and most effectively promote practices in attachment. Parents may use different attachments practices to build relationships with their with and respond to their children, despite the intuitive and universal component of attachment relationships. Mothers and families interact with and respond to their children in different ways according to their beliefs, values, and what is expected in cultural environment. Many of those practices have, have been passed down for generations because they result in positive attachment relationships between children and their mothers and families, and because they adequately responds to children's needs. So that is how culture affects attachment.
Hi, I'm Lord Me M. Cagang, and I'm gonna talk about cognitive development and moral reasoning. Have you heard about cognitive development? So, cognitive development means how children think, explore, and figure things out. It is the development of knowledge, skills, problem solving, and disposition. So, dispositions like what are you used to, or in which state are you in right now, or what is your knowledge right now, um, which help the children to think about and understand the world around them, the development. So, brain, so brain development is part of cognitive development, by the way. Cognitive development is also the process by which human brains acquire, organize, and learn to use knowledge, which involves a multitude of factors, both inherent and learned. So, inherent by nature, nana siya sa imuha, like through mind, and learn through experience. So, by the time you reach adulthood, you have learned a few things about how the world works. Like, for example, kita, na adolescents na ta, ninyo. And like to promote a child's cognitive development, it is important that we actively engage ourselves like in a quality interactions or ang kanang mga parents. It is important they my gosh, they engage themselves on a daily basis. For example, like just simple by just simply talking to them and let them explore their toys like that. Let me introduce two theories of cognitive development. First is the Piaget's stage theory by John Piaget, silent T. So, he described and explained the changes in logical thinking of children and adolescents. Then he proceeds to four stages based on maturation and experience. So, the first from Piaget's stage theory is the sensory motor stage. It takes place within the first 2 years of child's life. It is marked by the child discovering the difference between themselves and their environment. So the second one is the pre-operational reasoning stage, which begins at 2 and lasts until 6 or at the age of 7. So during this period, children are thinking at a symbolic level but are not yet using cognitive operations. And the third from Piaget theory is the concrete operational reasoning stage, from 6 or 7 to 11 or 12 years old. And the last one is the formal operational reasoning stage, from 11 or 12 years old and throughout the rest of life. The second theory is the Vygotsky socio-cultural theory by Lev Vygotsky. He was a Russian teacher who is considered a pioneer in learning in social context. He is also a psychologist. Vygotsky had a groundbreaking theory that language was the basis of learning. His points including the argument that language supports other activities such as reading and writing. Culture was a primary determinant of knowledge acquisition. He argued that children learn from the beliefs and attitudes modeled by their culture. So, Lev also put emphasis on the importance of social interactions as the key ingredient for how humans understand the world. At the same time, he thought that how people share information shapes their culture and shapes how they learn new things. Vygotsky's theory focuses on the relationship of the learner with their teacher, as well as the sharing of information through language. So the difference between Piaget and Vygotsky's theory is that Piaget believed that a child can be independent and explore things on her own to learn, while Vygotsky believed that a child can learn through social interactions, which I also believe that both of both of them are similar because of how they explain things, or how a person or a child how a child's cognitive is developing. What is moral reasoning? So moral reasoning is the study of how people think about right and wrong and how they acquire and apply moral rules. There are 7 steps of moral reasoning. First is gather the facts, from who, from where, and what, something like that. And the second one is determine the ethical issues, the statement of the problem. Third is determine what virtues or principles have a bearing on the case, identifying the relevant factors. Fourth is list the alternatives or develop a list of opinions. Fifth, compare the alternatives with the virtues and principles. And sixth, consider the consequences or test the options that each of you have given. And the last one is you make the decision. Make a decision. So, from the 7 steps of moral reasoning, in short, I can say that it requires us to engage to ethical values and those right principles and have a talk with those principles to see if we agree or disagree about them, like in a circle. So like you will talk about them, could it not harm others, so you will not agree with it, something like that, and then you will conclude, make decisions.
So hi, I am Sergeant Catibod, and I will be the one to tackle all about the other developmental process. Actually, there are many developmental psychologists who divides our development into three areas. Number one, physical. Number two is cognitive. Number three is the psychosocial development.
As we all know, adolescence begins with puberty. Several physical changes occur during puberty, and in this time, primary and sexual characteristics will begin to develop and mature. Primary sexual characteristics are the organs specifically needed for production, like the uterus and ovaries in females and testes in males. On the other hand, sexual characteristics are physical signs of sexual maturation, like the development of breasts and hips for the girls, facial hairs, and deepened voice for the boys. Also, in physical development, both sexes experience a rapid increase in height. For the girls, this rapid increase in height begins between 8 and 13 years old, with an adult height reached between 10 and 16 years old. On the other hand, boys begin their growth spurt slightly later, usually between 10 and 16 years old, and reach the adult height between 13 and 17 years old. In cognitive development, there is a cognitive empathy, also known as the theory of mind. Several studies and researchers, including the works of Tuner and Aharon Peretz in 2005, relate to the ability to take the perspective of others and feel concern about them. According to the U.S. Army, RDECOM, teenage thinking is also present and is characterized by the ability to reason logically and solve hypothetical problems. In psychosocial development, there is a study of G. Stanley Hale, who is a pioneer in the study of adolescent development, revealed that most teens do not experience adolescent storm and stress. Also, some adolescents adopt the values that their parents expect for them. Other teens also develop identities that are in opposition to their parents' want, but align with a peer group. This is very common today as peer relationship became a central focus in adolescents' lives nowadays.
Thanks for watching!